January 5th, 2026. You stand on the jagged lip of Table Mountain. The morning sun glints off Cape Town far below, but all you register is the drop, 1,200 feet of sheer granite slicing into Platteklip Gorge. You are Brendan Weinstein, 32 years old, one of the most decorated wingsuit pilots alive. 1,600 wingsuit flights, 800 base jumps. You have flown where others only dreamed. Your heart beats steady. The suit hugs your body like a second skin. You count down under your breath. 3, 2, 1. You step into nothing. For 3 perfect seconds, the world is yours. Then, gravity tightens its grip, and everything changes. Brendan Weinstein grew up chasing horizons in Utah, where red rock cliffs taught him the language of wind and stone. By his early 20s, he had already logged more than 1,000 parachute jumps. Skydiving felt too safe, too scripted. He moved into base, bridges, antennas, spans, earth, then discovered wingsuits. The suit turned freefall into flight, a fragile membrane of nylon and Kevlar that let a human body ride the air like a hawk. Sponsors noticed. Red Bull featured him. Online followers counted in the tens of thousands. He founded Base Beta and Base Access, teaching others the margins between alive and not. Yet he never lost the quiet reverence of the first jump. Every exit point carried its own personality, its own unforgiving math. In late 2025, he told his partner, Kivia Martins, he needed one more trip. They had a young son now, eyes wide with the same wonder Brendan once felt. Kivia understood the pull. She had watched him suit up 100 times. Still, she asked him to promise he would check in with locals. He kissed her forehead, packed light, and flew to Cape Town. Table Mountain had called to him for years, a UNESCO World Heritage Site whose sheer walls and hidden gorges promised the cleanest lines he had ever seen. He arrived without fanfare, no messages to the South African base community, no reconnaissance with those who had flown Platteklip Gorge before. He simply studied satellite images, trusted his instincts, and told himself the numbers would hold. To understand why Table Mountain is a siren for pilots, you have to understand its geometry. Unlike the jagged peaks of the Alps, Table Mountain is a 3-kilometer-long flat monolith. When the prevailing southeasterly winds hit that vertical face, the air doesn't just flow over it, it compresses and accelerates, creating a high-pressure cushion at the edge. But once that air clears the rim, it collapses into a chaotic vortex known as a rotor. For a wingsuit pilot, this is the dead zone. You aren't just flying through air, you are flying through a fluid that is curling back on itself, trying to physically pull you into the granite. Locals call it the tablecloth effect when the clouds roll in. But even on a clear day, the invisible physics are the same. The mountain doesn't just sit there, it breathes, and it breathes downward. Dawn on the 5th broke cool and clear. Brendan shouldered his pack at the base of the cableway trail, the nylon of the wingsuit rustling softly against his legs. The air smelled of finbose and distant sea salt. Hikers passed him on the path, families laughing, cameras clicking, oblivious that a man in black and red was walking among them carrying his own exit ticket. He climbed alone, pulse rising with each switchback. He reached the exit ledge just after 9. Wind whispered across the flat tabletop, carrying the faint echo of traffic from the city below. He checked his altimeter. He flexed his fingers inside the gloves. Everything red-green. Yet something in the silence felt off balance, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. He stood motionless for a long minute, studying the line. Platteklip Gorge dropped away in a narrow chute of rock and scrub. The flight path he had visualized a dozen times on screen now stretched real and merciless beneath his boots. He knew the margins were tight, perhaps 30 feet of clearance on either side before the walls closed in. Experienced pilots had flown it cleanly before. He told himself he was one of them. He rolled his shoulders once, feeling the familiar tension in the fabric across his back. A small countdown left his lips, almost inaudible. Then he leaned forward, and the world fell away. For the first heartbeat, he was weightless, perfect. The wingsuit inflated with a soft whoosh that filled his ears like distant thunder. Air rushed past his helmet at 100 miles an hour, then 120. He angled his body, arms locked, legs straight, carving the invisible rail of wind he had ridden so many times. Below, the gorge opened like a green wound. Hikers on the trail looked up, tiny figures frozen in mid-stride. He felt the familiar surge of control, the godlike calm that always arrived once he was committed. The suit was flying true, the numbers were holding. He began the gentle flare that would bleed off speed and set him up for parachute deployment. That is when the air betrayed him. The wind shear he could not see from the ledge caught the left wing first. A sudden, invisible fist yanked his shoulder down. His trajectory tilted. The right wall of the gorge rushed closer, faster than any correction could answer. He tried to roll, hips twisting inside the suit, but the fabric fought him now, heavy with the wrong angle. Altitude bled away at an impossible rate. He felt the first cold spike of disbelief in his stomach. This could not be happening. Not to him. Not with his numbers. He wrenched his shoulders again, forcing the suit to bite more air. But the ground was no longer a distant promise. It was a closing door. Rocks the size of cars filled his visor. He heard his own breathing, ragged now inside the helmet, a sound he had never heard before in freefall. The trail rushed up, hikers scattering. One woman's scream cutting across the wind like a blade. Impact comes at 120 miles per hour. The sound is not dramatic, it is simply final. A heavy, wet thud that echoes once off the gorge walls and dies. The physics of an impact at that speed are absolute. There is no glancing blow. The kinetic energy stored in a human body moving that fast is staggering. It is equivalent to a head-on vehicle collision into a concrete wall, but without the steel cage to absorb the shock. Deceleration occurs in a fraction of a millisecond. It is a transition from peak human performance to total stillness, so rapid that the nervous system cannot even process the signal of pain. There was no time for regret, no final message, only the abrupt and absolute end of motion. Search and rescue mobilized within minutes. At 9:55 a.m., they located the body. David Nell, WSAR spokesperson, later said, "The crashed pilot was located shortly before 10 a.m. Tragically, he was found deceased. By 11:26, the recovery was complete. The mountain returned to its quiet rhythm, hikers resuming their climb past the taped-off trail, voices subdued." Kivia Martins receives the call in Utah, while their son plays at her feet. She confirms Brendan's identity to NBC News, in a voice steady with shock. Later, she writes a short message that travels through the base community like a prayer. Brendan was deeply loved. He left a lasting impact on everyone around him. One day their son will hear the stories and know the man who flew closer to the edge than most ever dared. Fellow jumpers speak of his technical brilliance, his huge following, his incredible ability. In the days that follow, the wingsuit community fell quiet, understanding that every flight ends the same way. Either you land or you do not. Sandparks reiterated what the mountain had already proven. It does not negotiate.